The billionaire took off his $1,000 watch, put on a worn-out flannel shirt, and prepared for a date where his entire goal was to look like he had nothing. What could possibly make a man with everything pretend to be a man with nothing? What is the answer? Before we find out why, I'd love to know where you're all listening from today. Drop your city in the comments, and let's get into it. In the heart of a bustling city, where the skyline pierced the clouds, somewhere echoed the cry of a child. Sienna Ellis knelt on the old but clean playground of Little Sprouts preschool. "Are you okay, Jack?" A small boy, no more than 4, clung to her leg, his face streaked with tears from a scraped knee. Sienna's hands moved gently, wiping his cheeks with a tissue from her pocket, her voice a steady murmur of comfort that seemed to wrap around him like a warm blanket. "It's okay, just a little bit. Jack is good, right? Let's stand up together." She was 26, with a face that exuded gentleness but steadfastness. Her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, her eyes sharp and kind, reflecting a depth that came from facing life's rough edges head-on. Dressed in a plain t-shirt and jeans dotted with playground dirt, she exuded a resilience. As the boy sniffled and finally managed a small smile, Sienna felt a familiar weight settle in her chest. The preschool, with its creaky floors and leaky roof, was more than a job. It was her anchor, a promise she'd made to her late mother, who had poured her heart into places like this for kids from families scraping by. But today, the worries pressed harder. An envelope lay crumpled in her bag, a notice from the utility company about overdue bills, threatening to cut the water next week. She straightened up, brushing off her knees, and glanced at the other teachers gathered nearby, their faces etched with the same quiet anxiety. "We'll figure this out," she said softly, her tone calm and unwavering, even as her mind raced through options, fundraisers, grants, anything to keep the doors open. Deep down, she dreamed of expanding Little Sprouts, turning it into a haven for more children in need, a legacy that would honor her mother's memory. She wasn't one to wait for rescue. She'd always forged her own path, even if it meant sleepless nights poring over budgets. Yet, in rare moments of solitude, she wondered if there was room in her life for something more, a genuine connection, someone who saw her strength without trying to fix her. Across town, in the sleek glass tower of Austin Enterprises, Javon Austin sat at the head of a polished mahogany conference table, the room humming with the low buzz of projectors and murmured agreements. At 32, he commanded the space effortlessly. His dark eyes scanned the room as executives pitched their latest ideas, but his mind wandered to the phone call from his mother earlier that morning. "It's time to settle down, Javon," she'd insisted, her voice laced with that familiar mix of concern and expectation. Another blind date set up, another woman from their elite circle drawn more to his fortune than to him. He ended the call with a polite deflection, but the emptiness lingered. As one executive droned on about a flawed marketing strategy, Javon leaned forward, his voice cutting through like a blade. "This won't work," he stated flatly, dismantling the proposal with sharp logic that left the room silent. He was brilliant, ruthless when needed, but beneath the facade of control, a weariness gnawed at him. Surrounded by yes-men and social climbers, he craved something real, a kindred spirit. In quiet reflections, like now, staring out at the city sprawl below, he toyed with an absurd idea. What if he stripped away the wealth, pretended to be ordinary? Could he find someone who valued him for his thoughts, his hidden vulnerabilities? The meeting wrapped up, and Javon dismissed the team with a nod, retreating to his office. His thoughts drifted to the dating app he'd heard about, one that hid identities, focusing on conversations rather than profiles. It was a risk, a way to test if authenticity existed beyond his gilded life. Meanwhile, back at Little Sprouts, Sienna gathered the kids for story time, her resolve hardening. The app popped into her mind too. A whim from a late-night scroll, a chance to talk without judgments about her struggles. Little did either know, their worlds were on a collision course, drawn by the simple act of swiping into the unknown. One cool Saturday afternoon, Sienna arrived at the Cozy Corner Cafe a few minutes early, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and the faint aroma of fresh brewed coffee mingling with cinnamon rolls from the display case. She chose a table by the window and ordered a simple herbal tea, cradling the warm mug in her hands as she stared out at the passing pedestrians. Her mind wandered back to Little Sprouts, the leaky faucet in the bathroom she'd have to fix herself, the stack of bills waiting on her kitchen table. The app had seemed like a harmless distraction when she'd signed up, a way to chat anonymously without the pressure of real-life expectations. She wasn't looking for a savior or a fairy tale, just someone to talk to who might understand the quiet battles of everyday life. Yet here she was, nerves fluttering faintly, wondering if this J from their messages would show up at all. The bell above the door tinkled, and in walked a man who matched the vague description they'd exchanged. No profile pics, just words. He was tall, broad-shouldered. His flannel shirt looked worn at the cuffs, like it'd seen better days, paired with faded jeans and scuffed work boots that thudded softly on the wooden floor. There was an awkwardness in his stride, as if he wasn't used to places like this. But when his eyes met hers across the room, something shifted. A spark of recognition, perhaps, or just the pull of curiosity. He approached with a hesitant nod, his dark hair slightly tousled, and pulled out the chair opposite her. Jay, that's what he'd called himself in their chats, sat down with a quiet exhale, his large hands folding on the table. Up close, Sienna noticed the contrast. His clothes screamed ordinary, maybe even struggling, but his posture held a quiet confidence, like someone who'd faced storms and come out steadier. His eyes, deep and thoughtful, scanned her face not with judgment but with genuine interest. He ordered a black coffee, his voice low and a bit rough around the edges, as if he didn't speak much these days. The conversation started slow, tentative exchanges about the weather, the app's quirky matching system, but soon it eased into something more real. As Sienna opened up about her day at the preschool, the chaos of snack time, the joy in a child's first drawing, she felt him truly listening. Not the polite nods she got from well-meaning friends, but an attentive silence that made her words feel valued. Jay leaned in slightly, his brow furrowing in thought, and shared a bit about his own rough patch, hinting at lost jobs and the grind of starting over without specifics that might scare her off. There was a depth to him, a way he phrased things that suggested education and insight hidden beneath the humble exterior. Sienna found herself drawn to that. His questions weren't prying, but probing, like he wanted to understand her world without imposing his own. For Javon, disguised in this role, it was a revelation. In his usual life, conversations revolved around deals and dollars, people hanging on his every word for what they could gain. But here, as Jay, he could just be. Sienna's passion for the kids lit up her face, her voice steady despite the challenges she mentioned in passing, the tight budget, the fight to keep the place running. He admired her grit, not out of pity, but because it mirrored something he'd lost in his climb to the top. That raw determination without a safety net. She didn't know his secret, of course, the penthouse waiting across town, the empire he'd built. The lie felt necessary, a shield to test if this connection was real. As they talked, he caught himself smiling genuinely for the first time in weeks, the weight of his isolation lifting just a fraction. The awkwardness melted away as they discovered shared laughs over small things, a mutual love for old jazz records, a disdain for superficial small talk. Sienna sensed a story behind his reserved demeanor, like he carried burdens he wasn't ready to unpack, and that intrigued her. Not in a dramatic way, but quietly, making her wonder what lay beneath. By the time their cups were empty, an unspoken agreement hung in the air. They'd meet again. No strings, no judgments. Just two people seeking a real spark in a world full of facades. As they parted outside the cafe, the autumn breeze carrying the scent of rain, both felt a tug of curiosity. For Sienna, it was the promise of companionship without expectations. For Javon, it was the thrill of being seen for once, even if through a veil of deception that would one day unravel everything. Over the next few weeks, their meetings evolved into something resembling real dates, though neither dared label them that way. It started simple, in the sprawling city park where autumn leaves crunched underfoot, and the air carried the crisp scent of falling rain. Sienna suggested it first. A walk to clear their heads, nothing fancy. Jay showed up in his usual casual getup, a worn jacket over that flannel shirt, hands shoved in his pockets as if bracing against more than just the chill. They strolled along the winding paths, past joggers and dog walkers, and Sienna found herself opening up about the little victories at Little Sprouts, like the day a shy girl finally joined in circle time. Jay listened with that quiet intensity of his, nodding at the right moments, his eyes reflecting a genuine warmth that made her feel seen, not studied. He shared bits too, vague stories of past jobs that had fallen through, the kind of setbacks that left a person questioning everything. But what struck Sienna was how he turned the conversation back to her dreams, asking thoughtful questions about expanding the preschool without making it sound impossible. There was a spark in those exchanges, like verbal chess matches where neither wanted to win, just to engage. One afternoon, as they sat on a bench watching kids chase pigeons, Jay suggested a small tweak to her fundraising idea, partnering with local businesses for donations instead of big grants. It was practical, sharp, and Sienna felt a flicker of admiration. This guy, who claimed to be scraping by, had a mind like a strategist. She teased him lightly about it, and his laugh, deep and unexpected, eased something in her chest she hadn't realized was tight. From the park, their outings spilled into everyday errands, like the bustling neighborhood supermarket where fluorescent lights hummed overhead and carts rattled down aisles stocked with bargains. Sienna needed supplies for the school, crayons, snacks on a shoestring budget, and Jay tagged along, pushing the cart with an awkward grip as if he hadn't done this in years. He fumbled with the produce, weighing apples like they were puzzles, and Sienna couldn't help but smile at his earnest attempts to help. When she explained her trick for stretching dollars, comparing prices like a pro, he absorbed it all, even jotting notes on his phone. In return, he pointed out efficiencies she hadn't considered, like bulk buys from overlooked vendors. It wasn't romantic in the movie sense, but there was an intimacy in it, sharing the mundane without pretense. Sienna noticed how his presence made the chore feel lighter, his subtle humor cutting through the fatigue of her long days. The real test came at Little Sprouts itself, when Sienna mentioned the persistent drip from the bathroom sink that was driving up the water bill. Jay offered to take a look, rolling up his sleeves in the cramped utility closet amid the chatter of children in the next room. He wasn't a natural handyman. Tools slipped from his grasp, and he muttered under his breath as water sprayed unexpectedly, soaking his shirt. Sienna handed him towels, suppressing a grin, but she appreciated the effort. No one had stepped up like that for her in ages, not without expecting something back. As he tightened the pipes, grimy but determined, they talked finances in hushed tones. Her worries about the overdue notices, his ideas for a simple budget app to track expenses. His advice was spot on, drawing from what seemed like real-world smarts. And Sienna felt a partnership budding, two minds clicking without hierarchy. For Javon, these moments were a wake-up call. In his disguised life as Jay, he dove into a world far from boardrooms and private jets, and it invigorated him. Sienna's self-respect shone through in everything: the way she commanded the classroom with quiet authority, her refusal to complain despite the odds. He found himself drawn to her differences, her unfiltered passion that made his own achievements feel empty. Fixing that pipe, laughing off the mess, he felt alive in a way wealth never provided. And Sienna? She started seeing past his supposed unemployment to the kindness underneath, the depth that made her heart quicken during their debates. These flat-broke dates weren't about grand gestures. They were building something real, layer by layer, even as Javon's secret loomed like a shadow neither could yet see. Meanwhile, across the city in the sprawling Austin family estate, where manicured lawns stretched like green carpets under the evening sky, and the grand house glowed with warm lights from oversized windows, a different kind of tension brewed. Javon's parents had invited Harper Gamble over for what they called a casual dinner, but everyone knew it was more than that. Harper arrived right on time, stepping out of her sleek convertible with the poise of someone used to turning heads. She was the picture of perfection, tall and elegant in a designer dress that hugged her figure just right, her blonde hair cascading in flawless waves, makeup subtle but impeccable. At 30, she carried herself like she'd already conquered the world, or at least the social circles that mattered in it. Javon's mother greeted her at the door with a hug that felt a tad too enthusiastic, ushering her into the opulent living room where crystal chandeliers cast sparkles on antique furniture. His father poured drinks from a polished bar cart, the clink of ice cubes filling the brief silences. Harper settled onto the plush sofa, crossing her legs with effortless grace, and the conversation flowed easily at first. Talk of mutual friends, upcoming charity galas, the latest business mergers that kept their families intertwined. She laughed at the right moments, her voice light and melodic, complimenting the decor and the wine with just enough flattery to seem sincere. But as the evening wore on, cracks appeared in that polished facade. Javon's absence was the elephant in the room. He'd begged off with a vague excuse about work, but his parents brushed it aside, praising him as the driven heir to their empire. Harper's smile tightened ever so slightly when they mentioned his recent distractions. Late nights, unexplained outings. She leaned forward, her eyes sharpening with a curiosity that bordered on calculation. "He's been so elusive lately," she remarked casually, swirling her glass. "I hope everything's all right. You know how much I care about him." There was an edge to it, a possessiveness that hung in the air like perfume too strong for the room. Javon's mother nodded sympathetically, sharing a story about his childhood ambitions, but Harper's mind seemed elsewhere, probing for details on his schedule, his new habits. Deep down, Harper saw Javon as the ultimate prize, not just for his looks or charm, but for the power and status that came with the Austin name. She'd been groomed for alliances like this, her own family pushing her toward him with subtle hints of mergers and legacies. But his growing distance irked her. It wasn't jealousy yet, but a sense of entitlement slipping away. As the parents excused themselves to check on dinner, Harper pulled out her phone in the quiet moment, fingers tapping swiftly. She messaged a discreet contact, a private investigator she'd used before for business rivalries. "Look into Javon Austin's recent activities," she instructed, discreetly. "I need to know where he's spending his time, and with whom." She tucked the phone away as footsteps approached, her smile snapping back into place. The estate felt heavier that night, the weight of expectations and secrets pressing down. Harper left with air kisses and promises of future plans, but the seed of suspicion had taken root. Little did she know her quiet probe would soon stir up storms in lives she barely understood, threatening the fragile connection Javon had found far from this gilded cage. The community room at Little Sprouts buzzed with the low hum of chatter and the clink of paper cups, a modest fundraiser unfolding under flickering fluorescent lights. Handmade posters adorned the walls, drawn by the kids with bright crayons, their uneven letters spelling out hope for new books and a playground slide that didn't wobble. Sienna moved through the crowd of parents and local shop owners, her smile steady, but her shoulders tense from the weight of making this night count. The preschool's future hung on these small donations, and she felt the pressure in every handshake, every polite thank you she offered. Her simple navy dress, chosen for its practicality, caught the occasional spill of juice, but she brushed it off, her focus unwavering. Jay lingered near the snack table, his worn jacket slightly out of place among the suburban moms and dads, yet he blended in, watching Sienna with that quiet intensity she'd come to recognize. Then came the moment that shifted the air. A well-dressed man, a parent with a flashy watch and a louder voice, cornered Sienna near the donation jar. His tone dripped with condescension, pointing out the peeling paint, the outdated toys, as if her efforts were a personal failing. "This place is falling apart," he said loudly, drawing eyes. "How do you expect kids to learn in a dump like this?" Sienna's face didn't falter, but her hands clenched at her sides, her calm voice starting to explain the budget constraints, the plans for repairs. The crowd murmured, some nodding sympathetically, others shifting uncomfortably, and Sienna felt the sting of being judged for her life's work. Before she could finish, Jay stepped forward, his presence cutting through the tension like a steady breeze. He didn't raise his voice, but his words carried a weight that silenced the room. He spoke of community, of the value of places like Little Sprouts, his logic sharp and unyielding, dismantling the man's complaints with facts about local funding and the impact of small schools. His tone wasn't angry, but firm, his eyes locking onto the critics until the man's bravado crumbled. With a muttered excuse, the parent retreated, leaving behind a stunned silence. Sienna stood frozen, her heart pounding not from the confrontation but from the sight of Jay, unassuming, rough around the edges Jay, commanding the room with a strength she hadn't seen before. The crowd resumed their chatter, but something had shifted. Sienna caught Jay's eye as he stepped back, offering her a small nod, almost sheepish, as if surprised by his own actions. In that moment, she saw not just the kind man she'd been getting to know, but someone solid, someone who stood up without calculating the cost. For Jay, it was instinct, not strategy. Defending her felt as natural as breathing, a reflex born from the respect he'd grown for her resilience. As the night wound down, Sienna handed out thank you notes, her fingers brushing against Jay's as she passed him a cup of coffee. The touch lingered, unspoken, and for the first time she sensed a bridge forming between them, fragile but real, built on a moment neither had planned. The fundraiser's success lingered like a warm glow as Sienna unlocked the door to her small apartment, the faint hum of the city filtering through the open window. The space was modest, second-hand furniture, a bookshelf stuffed with teaching manuals, and a single potted plant, thriving despite her hectic schedule. Jay followed her inside, his boots heavy on the creaky floorboards, carrying a paper bag of leftovers from the event. The air between them felt charged, not with grand romance, but with the quiet pull of two people who'd started to see each other clearly. Sienna kicked off her shoes, her navy dress still speckled with juice stains from the night, and gestured toward the tiny kitchen table. The room smelled faintly of lavender from a candle she'd lit earlier, hoping to chase away the stress of the day. They sat close, sharing slices of cold pizza and stories that flowed easier now, the kind of talk that happens when defenses soften. Sienna laughed about a kid at school who'd drawn her as a superhero, cape and all, and Jay's eyes crinkled with a smile that felt more open than usual. He told her about a jazz club he used to visit, describing the saxophone's wail like it was a memory he could still taste. The conversation drifted to dreams, hers for the preschool, his vague hints at wanting something beyond the grind he claimed to live. Their knees brushed under the table, a small contact that sent a ripple through Sienna's chest, unexpected but not unwelcome. She noticed the way his hands moved when he spoke, deliberate yet gentle, and how his gaze held hers without demanding anything in return. As the night deepened, the space between them shrank. The candle flickered, casting soft shadows on the walls, and the world outside seemed to fade. They moved to the couch, closer now, their voices dropping to murmurs. Sienna felt a pull, not just physical but something deeper, a sense of being understood, of meeting someone who matched her strength without trying to overshadow it. Jay's fingers grazed hers, hesitant at first, then steadier. And when their lips finally met, it wasn't fireworks but a slow, certain warmth, like coming home after a long day. The moment unfolded naturally, their connection built on weeks of shared errands and quiet talks, not grand gestures. In her small bedroom, with its faded quilt and single lamp, they let go of the world's weight, finding solace in each other's presence, a fleeting escape from their separate struggles. Morning light slipped through the blinds, painting stripes across the floor. Jay woke first, the warmth of Sienna beside him a stark contrast to the cold reality of his secret. He lay still, watching her sleep, her face soft in a way it rarely was during the day's battles. Guilt crept in, heavy and sharp. He'd built this night on a lie. Jay, the struggling everyman, not Javon, the billionaire hiding behind a flannel shirt. The truth clawed at him, urging him to confess, to lay bare the penthouse, the empire, the life he'd concealed. But as Sienna stirred, her eyes opening with a sleepy smile, fear gripped him, not of her anger, but of losing this, the first real thing he'd felt in years. He swallowed the words, choosing silence instead, knowing the lie was now a fragile thread holding them together, one that would snap under the weight of time. Unseen by either, this night had planted a seed, a child, conceived in love but shadowed by deception, waiting to change everything. The playground at Little Sprouts burst with color and noise on a crisp Saturday, the air alive with the scent of popcorn and freshly mown grass. Bright banners swayed between the trees, their hand-painted letters shouting, "Sprouts Fest," in wobbly reds and yellows, a testament to the kids' enthusiasm. Tables overflowed with homemade cookies, knitted scarves, and jars of lemonade, while a local guitarist strummed a gentle tune, blending with the laughter of children chasing bubbles. Sienna wove through the crowd, her simple sweater flecked with glitter from a craft station, her smile bright but her steps quick with purpose. This community event was Jay's idea, a way to rally the neighborhood around the preschool, to turn local pride into dollars for leaking pipes and crumbling walls. She'd poured weeks into it, stapling flyers to lampposts, charming shop owners for donations. And now it was paying off. Jay stood by a dunk tank, his flannel sleeves rolled up, joking with kids as he handed out tickets. He looked at ease, his broad frame blending into the chaos, but his eyes kept finding Sienna, a quiet warmth in them. The donation box brimmed with envelopes and crumpled bills, more than enough to clear the overdue utilities and maybe even replace the wobbly slide. Sienna paused by the sandbox, watching a little boy show off his painted face, a tiger, fierce and proud. Her chest loosened, the constant knot of worry unraveling just a bit. The preschool wasn't saved, not yet. But this felt like a real step forward, a moment where her mother's dream didn't seem so out of reach. She caught Jay's gaze as he helped a girl untangle a kite, and his quick grin felt like a shared victory, small but solid. They worked side by side as the sun dipped low, packing up tables, thanking volunteers. The crowd thinned, leaving behind a glow of goodwill and a tally that exceeded Sienna's hopes. Over a shared thermos of coffee, they sat on a bench, the playground quiet now, except for the creak of swings in the breeze. Sienna felt a rush of gratitude, not just for the funds, but for Jay's steady presence, his knack for seeing solutions where she saw only obstacles. He seemed lighter, too, his usual guarded edge softened, as if this day had given him something he'd been missing. For a fleeting moment, everything aligned. Their laughter, the success, the sense that they were building something together, not just for the school, but between them. Yet beneath this triumph, a shadow lingered. Jay's secret, his true identity as Javon, the billionaire playing a role, sat heavy in his chest, unnoticed by Sienna but ticking like a clock. The day's joy felt real, but it rested on a fragile lie, one that could shatter this fragile connection. As they locked up the school, the stars peeking through the city haze, neither knew that this victory was a fleeting pause, a breath, before the truth would upend everything they'd started to cherish. The grand ballroom of the Austin Enterprises Gala shimmered under chandeliers that dripped light like liquid gold, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfume and polished ambition. Men in tailored tuxedos and women in flowing gowns mingled, their laughter a practiced melody over the clink of champagne glasses. Sienna stood near the edge of the crowd, her simple black dress a quiet contrast to the opulence, her presence a favor to Jay, who'd asked her to join him for what he called a work thing. She felt out of place, her fingers fidgeting with a small wooden keychain he'd given her weeks ago at a flea market, a token of their simpler days. Jay, still in his carefully crafted guise, wore a borrowed suit that fit him well enough to pass, his usual flannel swapped for something sharper, though his boots still carried a faint scuff of playground dirt. He stayed close, his hand brushing hers, grounding her in this sea of strangers. The evening had been smooth, almost too perfect, with speeches about corporate triumphs and toasts to future deals. Sienna smiled politely, her thoughts drifting to the preschool, the kids, the small victories they'd celebrated together. But the mood shifted when Harper Gamble glided into view, her emerald dress catching every light, her smile sharp as a blade. She'd been watching Jay all night, her eyes narrowing with each glance at Sienna. Harper had hired that investigator weeks ago, and now, armed with a folder of damning photos and records, she saw her moment. As the band paused and the crowd hushed for the evening's final speech, she stepped forward, her heels clicking on the marble floor, and raised a hand to draw attention. The room fell silent as Harper's voice cut through, smooth but venomous, announcing a special revelation about one of their own. She held up a tablet, its screen flashing images, Javon Austin in his CEO office, signing contracts, shaking hands with tycoons. Then the same man in flannel, laughing with Sienna at the park. The crowd murmured, heads turning toward Jay, whose face drained of color. Harper's words were a calculated strike, exposing him as Javon Austin, billionaire, not the struggling everyman he'd claimed to be. She painted Sienna as a naive pawn, her tone dripping with pity that felt like a slap. The photos landed like blows, Javon's penthouse, his private jet, all proof of a life hidden from the woman at his side. Sienna stood frozen, the keychain digging into her palm. While Sienna was still stunned, Harper Gamble stepped forward. With a fake sympathetic smile, she said, "I feel sorry for you. He has a thing for girls like you." Harper took out her phone, showed Sienna carefully edited photos of her and Javon in intimate settings and said, "We're engaged. The wedding will probably be next year." The warmth of their shared nights, the trust they'd built, shattered under the weight of his lie. Her eyes met his, searching for the man she'd known, but all she saw was a stranger in a borrowed suit, his silence louder than any apology. The crowd's whispers grew, some amused, others shocked, but Sienna felt only the ache of betrayal, her world tilting as if the floor had dropped away. Javon's shoulders slumped, his carefully built facade crumbling before her, his mind racing with regret but no words to undo the damage. Harper stepped back, her smile triumphant, unaware she'd set in motion a storm that would unravel more than just a secret. For Sienna, the truth wasn't just about his wealth. It was the realization that the connection she'd cherished, the man she'd let into her heart, had been built on a foundation of deceit, leaving her to question everything, even as something unspoken grew within her, tying them together in ways neither yet understood. A moment of shattering truth. Before we continue, if you believe Sienna deserves justice, comment with a single word, justice. Let her know she's not alone. And now, the aftermath. The ballroom's shimmer felt like a distant memory as Sienna pushed through the heavy doors into the night, the cool air slapping her face like a wake-up call. The parking lot sprawled before her, dotted with luxury cars gleaming under sodium lights, their reflections dancing on puddles from an earlier rain. Her black dress swished with each step, a reminder of the evening's pretense, while the wooden keychain in her pocket, once a sweet token from a flea market stroll, now felt like a lead weight, pulling her down. The revelation still echoed in her ears. Jay was Javon Austin, a billionaire who'd played a role, hiding his empire behind scuffed boots and quiet smiles. Harper's tablet screen flashed in her mind, the photos of his real life, boardrooms and jets, twisted to make their connection look like a cheap scam. It wasn't just shock, it was a deep cut, knowing he'd seen her struggles, her passion for the preschool, and repaid it with a script. Javon burst out after her, his footsteps hurried on the asphalt, the gala's murmur fading behind him. His borrowed suit hung loose, the tie askew, as if the exposure had unraveled him physically. The air carried the faint scent of exhaust and wet earth, grounding the surreal moment. He reached for her arm, his voice breaking the silence with pleas, about seeking something real, about her being the first to see him truly. But the words bounced off her like rain on a window. Sienna stopped abruptly, her back straight, and turned to face him. Her eyes not blazing with anger, but iced over with a calm that chilled him more. She pulled the keychain from her pocket, its simple carving catching the light, and pressed it into his hand without a word. The touch was brief, final, like closing a book. She didn't scream or accuse. Her silence said it all. The trust shattered, the intimacy tainted. The taxi pulled up, its headlights cutting through the dark, and Sienna slid inside, the door's click a punctuation mark on the night. As the car pulled away, Javon stood frozen, the keychain's edges digging into his palm, the city lights blurring in his vision. The lie he'd told to escape his world had cost him the only genuine thing in it. Guilt washed over him, not just for the deception, but for pulling her into the spotlight, making her a pawn in Harper's game. He thought of their shared laughs, her fierce dedication to those kids, and how he'd undermined it all with his fear. Back in her apartment, Sienna leaned against the door, the quiet space closing in. The unlit candle from their last night sat on the table, a ghost of warmth now cold. Her hand drifted to her stomach, a subtle queasiness hinting at changes she couldn't yet face. The betrayal wasn't loud. It was a quiet unraveling, leaving her to rebuild alone, even as an unseen bond tied her to the man who'd broken her heart. The city wore a gray veil of rain as days bled into weeks after the gala's shattering truth. Sienna moved through the familiar chaos of little sprouts, her sneakers squeaking on the scuffed linoleum, the air thick with the scent of crayons and damp coats. She guided children through finger painting, her smile steady for their sake, but her eyes carried a new shadow. The sting of Javon's deception lingered, not as a loud wound, but a quiet bruise, pressed deeper by the memory of his earnest gaze as Jay. She'd trusted him, shared her fears about the preschool's crumbling finances, only to learn he was a billionaire playing a part. The betrayal wasn't just personal. It was a crack in the foundation of everything she'd dared to hope for. A partnership, a connection that felt real. Now she buried herself in routine, organizing story time, wiping down tables, anything to keep her mind from drifting to him. Yet, late at night, alone in her apartment, her hand would drift to her stomach, a nagging unease growing harder to ignore. Across town, Javon's pet house felt like a museum of his mistakes, its sleek surfaces reflecting the city's restless lights through towering windows. The scent of polished wood and leather couldn't mask the emptiness that had settled in. He sat at his desk, papers untouched, the glow of his laptop casting harsh shadows across his face. Meetings blurred into noise, his usual sharpness dulled by the weight of Sienna's absence. He replayed the gala, Harper's smug reveal, the photos that stripped away his disguise, Sienna's cold silence as she handed back the keychain. He'd wanted to be seen for himself, not his wealth, but the lie had cost him the one person who'd come close. Guilt gnawed at him, not just for deceiving her, but for exposing her to his world's cruelty, for letting her stand alone under those judgmental eyes. He stared at a photo on his phone, one he'd taken at the fundraiser, Sienna laughing with a child, her face unguarded. It was a life he'd touched and tainted, and the loss carved a hollow space he couldn't fill. Sienna's days at the preschool were a lifeline, but her body began to betray her. Mornings brought waves of nausea, dismissed at first as stress, until she couldn't ignore the signs. Alone in her bathroom, the fluorescent light harsh overhead, she held a pregnancy test, its 2 pink lines stark against the white stick. Her breath caught, the room spinning as the truth settled in. A child, his child, tied her to Javon in a way she hadn't anticipated, complicating the pain of his betrayal. She sank to the cold tile floor, the test clutched in her hand, tears welling not from anger, but from the weight of this new secret. It was hers alone to carry, a fragile truth she wasn't ready to share, especially not with the man who'd hidden so much from her. The preschool's struggles, the bills piling up, now felt like a backdrop to this larger unspoken challenge. She'd always faced hardships head-on, but this was uncharted, a future she couldn't plan for yet. Javon, meanwhile, paced his sterile office, the city's skyline a glittering rebuke outside. He'd tried calling her, leaving messages that went unanswered, each silence a reminder of his failure. The lie had been his shield, but it had wounded her, and the realization that he'd lost something irreplaceable, for the first time, love, left him unmoored. As Sienna tucked the test away in a drawer, her resolve hardening to protect her world, Javon faced his own truth. No amount of wealth could undo the damage. The consequences of his deception stretched between them, an invisible thread now tangled with a secret that would change everything, waiting to surface. The city churned on, oblivious to the fracture between Sienna and Javon, its gray mornings blending into weeks of quiet pain. At Little Sprouts, the playground swings creaked under a drizzle, the air heavy with wet earth and the faint tang of paint from a freshly touched-up fence. Sienna moved through her days with mechanical precision, her voice steady as she read to the kids, her hands quick to tidy scattered toys. But the spark in her eyes had dimmed, replaced by a guarded focus. The pregnancy test, hidden in her drawer, was a secret she guarded fiercely, its weight a constant undercurrent to her thoughts of Javon's betrayal. She avoided his calls, deleted his messages, and steeled herself against the memory of his laughter, his hands fixing pipes, his quiet support. The preschool struggles, bills, repairs, loomed large, but she'd face them alone, as always. Javon, meanwhile, retreated to the sterile expanse of his penthouse, the city skyline a glittering cage beyond the windows. The scent of polished wood and coffee couldn't mask the emptiness that had settled in since Sienna walked away. Guilt gnawed at him, a relentless ache for the trust he'd broken. Desperate to fix things, he fell back on what he knew best: money. He sent a check to Little Sprouts, a sum large enough to cover the overdue bills and more, delivered anonymously through a courier. He arranged for contractors to show up at the preschool, their trucks loaded with tools to mend the roof and plumbing. It was his way of apologizing, of easing her burden, but each move was instinctive, rooted in the habits of a man who solved problems with wealth. Sienna noticed the changes immediately. A new water heater appeared one morning, unrequested, its sleek metal out of place in the preschool's worn utility room. The check arrived in a plain envelope, no note, but the amount screamed Javon's handiwork. She stood in her cramped office, the paper trembling in her hands, her jaw tight. It wasn't gratitude she felt, but a fresh wave of hurt. This wasn't help, it was control. His wealth trying to buy forgiveness for a lie that cut deeper than money could mend. She tore the check in half, stuffed it back into the envelope, and mailed it to his corporate office, with a single word scrawled on it: no. The contractors were politely turned away, their tools unused, her voice firm but weary as she sent them off. Javon received the returned envelope late one evening, the torn check a silent rebuke. He sat in his office, the city lights flickering below, and felt the futility of his efforts. Money, his greatest weapon, was powerless here. Sienna didn't want his solutions. She wanted the truth he'd withheld. The realization settled like dust. He'd misjudged her strength, her pride, thinking he could fix a broken heart with resources. The preschool's needs were real, but so was her resolve, and his attempts only widened the gap between them. As Sienna locked up the school that night, the rain tapping on her umbrella, she felt the weight of her secret growing, a child tying her to a man she couldn't forgive. For Javon, the returned check was a mirror, reflecting a man who'd lost more than he'd bargained for, with no clear path to make it right. The city skyline glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Javon's penthouse office, a constellation of lights that felt colder than ever. It was late, the kind of hour where the world outside hushed, leaving only the faint hum of the air conditioning and the weight of his thoughts. The torn check Sienna had sent back lay on his desk, its jagged edges a silent accusation. The scent of polished mahogany and stale coffee clung to the air, but it couldn't mask the emptiness that had settled into every corner of his life since she walked away. Javon sat in the dim glow of a single lamp, his suit jacket discarded, tie loosened, as if shedding his armor might ease the ache. He'd tried to fix things with money, checks, contractors, solutions that had always worked before, but Sienna's rejection showed him how hollow those gestures were. He opened a drawer, pulling out a small stack of photos, not the polished headshots of his corporate life, but grainy images from a private investigator he'd hired months ago to keep tabs on his own lie. There was Sienna at Little Sprouts, laughing as she pushed a child on a swing, her face alive with a joy that didn't need wealth to shine. Another showed her handing out snacks, her ponytail swinging, her hands steady despite the burdens she carried. Each image was a punch to his chest, a reminder of the woman who'd made him feel alive, not as a CEO, but as a man. He'd built an empire on control, on the power of money. But staring at her smile, he saw the truth. His wealth had shaped a man too afraid to be honest, too proud to risk vulnerability. The realization hit like a quiet storm. It wasn't about how much he could give Sienna. It was about what he'd become, a man defined by power, not heart. To make things right, he'd have to let go of the arrogance that had kept him safe but alone.
His fingers hovered over his phone, the urge to call her strong, but he stopped. Words wouldn't fix this. Only action could. He thought of her values, her fierce honesty, her fight for those kids, and saw a path, not to win her back, but to honor what she stood for. He dialed his most trusted lawyer, his voice low, not commanding but resolute, like a man waking from a long sleep. "I need to set up a foundation," he said, the idea forming as he spoke, a way to give without strings, to support her world without claiming it. The city lights flickered beyond the glass, but for the first time, they didn't feel like a throne to defend. Javon leaned back, the photos still in hand, Sienna's face a beacon in the dark. He wasn't sure if she'd ever forgive him, but he knew he had to change, not just for her, but for the man he wanted to be. The call ended, and the silence felt different now. Not empty, but purposeful. The first step toward a redemption he'd have to earn. The law firm's conference room gleamed with understated elegance, its long mahogany table reflecting the soft glow of recessed lights. The air held a faint trace of leather and ink, the scent of decisions that shaped empires. Javon sat at the head, his posture steady but his face etched with a weariness that went beyond late nights. His suit, usually a symbol of control, hung slightly loose, as if he'd shed more than just weight in the weeks since Sienna's departure.
Across from him, a team of lawyers and financial advisors sat in crisp suits, their expressions a mix of curiosity and disbelief, folders and tablets spread before them. The room was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of paper, as they waited for him to speak. Outside, the city skyline loomed, a glittering reminder of the world he'd built, now feeling like a hollow crown. Javon's hands rested on a stack of documents, their pages outlining a decision that had kept him awake for days. The memory of Sienna's torn check, her refusal of his money, burned in his mind, a lesson in her unyielding pride. He'd spent nights staring at photos of her at Little Sprouts, her smile as she knelt beside a child, her hands steady despite the weight of her struggles. Those images had cracked something open in him, showing him that redemption wasn't about grand gestures, but about honoring what she valued: integrity, community, hope. He cleared his throat, his voice low but firm, and began laying out his plan. He was transferring 70% of his personal wealth, billions in assets, stocks, and properties, into a new charitable foundation. The room stirred, a ripple of shock passing through the advisors, but Javon's gaze remained steady, fixed on the papers as if they held his absolution. The foundation would be called the Sienna Preschool Fund, a name chosen not to win her back, but to echo her mother's dream of education for those who needed it most. He outlined its mission: to support small, struggling schools like Little Sprouts, to provide resources without strings, to empower communities rather than control them. The lawyers exchanged glances, one scribbling notes furiously, another's brow furrowed in confusion. Javon's voice carried a quiet resolve, not the commanding tone of the CEO they knew, but something humbler, as if he were shedding a skin. He insisted on one condition, his words deliberate. The donor's identity must remain anonymous. No press releases, no plaques, no credit. This wasn't about his name. It was about her values, the ones he'd failed to honor when he hid behind Jay. As he signed the final documents, the pen's scratch was the only sound, each stroke a step away from the man he'd been. The lead lawyer, a gray-haired veteran, leaned forward, his eyes wide with something like awe. But Javon only nodded, his face tired but certain. The act wasn't a plea for forgiveness. It was a reckoning, a choice to let go of the power that had defined him. Outside, the city pulsed on, indifferent, but in that room, something shifted. A man who'd built walls of wealth began to dismantle them, not for love alone, but for the truth Sienna had shown him. The papers were sealed, the foundation set in motion, and Javon stood, the weight of his sacrifice settling into a quiet strength, ready to face whatever came next. The private meeting room at Austin Enterprises exuded quiet power, its dark wood paneling and leather chairs absorbing the soft light from a single chandelier. The air carried a faint scent of polished oak and fresh coffee, untouched on a side table. Javon sat at one end, his posture calm but resolute, his suit crisp yet somehow less imposing than before. Sienna sat beside him, her simple blouse and jeans a stark contrast to the room's opulence, her face steady with a strength that needed no adornment. Across from them, Harper Gamble entered, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood, her emerald dress as flawless as her confidence. She'd been summoned under the pretense of discussing a business alliance, her smile practiced, expecting another chance to secure her place in Javon's world. The room felt smaller as the door closed, sealing the three in a moment heavy with unspoken stakes. Javon slid a slim folder across the table, its contents unassuming but lethal. Screenshots, timestamps, and metadata proving Harper's hand in the doctored photos that had exposed his lie at the gala. His movements were deliberate, his face not angry but composed, as if the truth itself was enough. Harper's smile faltered, her fingers hesitating before flipping open the folder. The evidence was undeniable. Her investigators' emails, the manipulated images, the calculated betrayal laid bare. The chandelier's light caught the sheen of her perfectly styled hair, but it couldn't hide the flicker of panic in her eyes as she scanned the pages. Sienna leaned forward, her presence commanding despite her simplicity. Her voice, when it came, was steady, tinged with a compassion that cut deeper than scorn. She spoke of seeking happiness without tearing others down, her words not an attack but a mirror, reflecting Harper's choices back at her. The room held its breath, the silence thick with the weight of her restraint. Harper's composure cracked, not into shouts, but a tight-lipped stillness, her hands gripping the folder as if it could anchor her fading control. The arrogance that had defined her melted under the calm certainty of the two across from her, their unity a quiet force that needed no theatrics. Javon broke the silence, his tone even, not vengeful, but final. He outlined the consequences. The Austin family would sever all ties with hers, withdrawing from shared ventures, ensuring her absence from their lives. It wasn't a public ruin, no headlines or lawsuits, but a precise excision, stripping her of influence without cruelty. Harper's face drained of color, her exit from the room swift and wordless, the click of her heels fading into the hallway. The punishment wasn't destruction, but isolation, a fitting end for someone who'd thrived on manipulation. As the door closed, Sienna and Javon exchanged a glance, not of triumph, but of shared resolve. The confrontation had been won, not with rage, but with truth, leaving the air lighter, the path forward clearer, as they stood together, ready to face what lay ahead. The late afternoon sun bathed the Little Sprouts playground in a golden glow, its rays filtering through the old oak trees, casting dappled shadows on the worn swings and colorful murals. The air carried the scent of fresh paint and blooming jasmine, a quiet testament to the preschool's slow revival. Sienna stood by the sandbox, her jeans dusted with playground dirt, her face softened by the familiar rhythm of children's laughter now faded as the day wound down. The confrontation with Harper was behind them, its resolution a weight lifted, but the deeper wound, Javon's betrayal, still lingered. She'd heard whispers of a new foundation saving schools like hers, though its anonymous donor remained a mystery. Her hand rested lightly on her stomach. The secret of the child within, a quiet pulse she hadn't yet shared. A truth she guarded as she rebuilt her trust. Javon appeared at the playground's edge, his figure no longer cloaked in flannel, but in a simple shirt and jeans. The billionaire stripped down to a man seeking redemption. The gravel crunched under his steps, each one measured, as if afraid to disturb the fragile peace. He carried no grand gestures, no traces of the CEO's polish, just a quiet resolve etched in the lines of his face. The weeks of his sacrifice, the billions given to the Sienna preschool fund, the severance of ties with Harper's World, had changed him, not just in action, but in spirit. He stopped a few feet away, the distance between them a silent acknowledgement of the hurt he'd caused. His eyes, once guarded, now held a raw honesty, searching hers for a sign of what might still be possible. The playground was still, the swings swaying gently in the breeze as he began to speak. His words weren't rehearsed apologies, but a steady outpouring of truth, how he'd fallen for her strength, her heart, not as Jay, but as himself, and how his lie had been a coward's shield. He spoke of wanting to be her equal, not her savior, a partner who'd earn her trust through time, not wealth. Sienna listened, her arms crossed, but her gaze softened, seeing not the man who'd deceived her, but the one who'd given up his empire to honor her values. The air felt lighter, the weight of their past easing as his sincerity filled the space between them. She stepped closer, her hand brushing his as she smiled, a small curve of her lips that carried forgiveness earned through his change. Her voice, when it came, was warm but teasing, hinting at the work he'd need to put in, especially as a father. She revealed the pregnancy, her words soft but steady, a bridge to a future they could build together. The confession settled between them, not a burden, but a promise, sealing their bond with a love rooted in truth. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of orange, they stood in the playground where it all began, two equals, ready to face tomorrow, their hearts aligned in a quiet, enduring victory. 2 years later, the Little Sprouts playground gleamed under a bright spring sun, its new slides and swings alive with children's laughter. The air buzzed with the scent of blooming flowers and fresh mulch, the once crumbling school now a vibrant hub, its walls painted with murals of soaring kites and smiling faces. Sienna knelt beside a sandbox, her hair tied back, her hands guiding a little girl's shovel as they built a lopsided castle. Her wedding ring caught the light, simple but steady, a quiet symbol of the life she'd built. Nearby, Javon chased their 2-year-old son, his laughter mingling with the boys' delighted squeals as they tumbled onto the grass. The billionaire's polished suits replaced by a T-shirt smudged with dirt. The Sienna Preschool Fund had grown into a network, its grants transforming schools across the city, empowering teachers and kids in neighborhoods like the one where Sienna's mother had once dreamed big. Sienna led it with a steady hand, her vision no longer a fragile hope, but a force, her name synonymous with change rooted in compassion. She moved through the playground, greeting parents, her presence warm but commanding, a woman who'd turned pain into purpose. The scars of Javon's lie had faded, replaced by a partnership forged in truth and time. Their love, a quiet strength that didn't need fanfare. Javon, no longer the isolated CEO, stood by a picnic table, handing out juice boxes, his smile genuine, softened by years of learning to listen rather than lead. He'd reshaped his company, prioritizing community over conquest. His boardroom, now a place where ideas like Sienna's could thrive. The weight of his past arrogance was gone, replaced by a warmth that showed in the way he ruffled their son's hair or caught Sienna's eye across the crowd. They worked as equals, their shared mission a legacy not of wealth, but of impact, touching lives far beyond their own. As the sun dipped, casting golden streaks across the playground, they sat together on a bench, their son napping against Javon's shoulder. The chatter of families faded, leaving a peaceful hum, the world they'd built vibrant around them. Their hands intertwined, a silent promise kept, their journey from deception to redemption complete. The playground, once a battleground of struggle, now stood as a testament to their love, a love that had weathered lies, grown through sacrifice, and blossomed into a future where hope and heart prevailed. What a journey of the heart. Thank you for being here with us. Stories like these are best when they're shared, and we have a wonderful community right here. We invite you to join the conversation and let us know. Which moment in Javon's transformation made you believe most in second chances? Your likes and subscribes help us bring more meaningful stories to life. It's so good to have you here.